She pointed at Amara like she was swatting a fly. Not a conversation, not a warning. Yoon Seo-ah walked into Kang Min-jae's office on a Tuesday morning, set her handbag on the edge of his desk like she already owned it, and said, "Her, gone, by Friday." Min-jae didn't argue, didn't ask why. He looked at Amara standing by the filing cabinet with a stack of folders pressed against her chest, and he said, "I'll handle it." That was it. 4 years, and that was it. If you've ever given everything to someone who couldn't even look you in the eye when they let you go, drop your city in the comments right now. And if this story hits something in you, hit that like button and subscribe, because I promise you, what happens next will make your jaw drop. This one travels far. Patrice. The morning it happened, Amara Johnson had already been at her desk for 2 hours before anyone else arrived. That wasn't unusual. She was always first. She unlocked the building, disabled the overnight security sweep, rerouted the morning guard rotation because one of the men, Baek Seong-il, third rotation, northeast corridor, had a court date for his son that nobody had thought to reschedule around, and she'd quietly adjusted the entire shift without being asked. She'd also confirmed 3 cargo manifests for the Busan port, responded to an encrypted message from the Tokyo liaison office on Min-jae's behalf using the approved cipher, and made sure his coffee was ready at exactly 7:42, the way he drank it. Black, with 1/2 spoon of sugar that he always claimed he didn't take. He took it every time. He just never mentioned it. She had a small mark on her left wrist from the edge of a filing cabinet she'd bumped that morning. A thin red line, barely anything, but it stung when she reached across the desk. She'd pressed a strip of tape over it and kept moving because there was always something next. That was Amara Johnson at 34 years old, inside one of the most dangerous criminal organizations operating across 4 countries. She did not look like someone who belonged there. She looked like someone's favorite aunt, round-faced, soft-voiced, with reading glasses that slipped down her nose and a tendency to apologize when other people ran into her. She'd spilled coffee on a visiting lieutenant from the Nagoya branch once and spent 6 minutes cleaning it up while he stood there stiff and furious, and she'd said, "I'm so sorry, I'm terrible with these cups," while simultaneously clocking the micro-recorder he had tucked under his lapel and sending a 2-word text to Min-jae's encrypted phone. Min-jae had that man removed from the building before the elevator doors closed. He never connected the dots out loud. He just knew that when Amara handed him something, it mattered, and when she looked slightly too long at a visitor, there was a reason. 4 years. And he'd never once asked her what the reason was. What? Yoon Seo arrived at 11. Amara knew she was coming because she'd booked the appointment herself. Personal visit, no security screen required, per Min-jae's instruction, which Amara had noted and flagged as unusual and then quietly unflagged because it was not her place to question what he did with his personal life. She had opinions. She kept them in a small locked room in the back of her head where she kept a lot of things. Seo-ah was tall, unhurried, and visually precise in the way of women who have spent their whole lives being looked at. She wore a charcoal coat with a collar that framed her face like it had been designed specifically for this building's lighting. She glanced at Amara once when she walked past the desk, and it was the kind of glance that categorized without engaging, the way you might look at furniture. "He's expecting you," Amara said. "Can I bring anything in?" "No," Seo-ah said without stopping. Amara went back to her screen. She had 17 things to finish before noon and she started on the next one. She could hear voices through the office door. Not words, but rhythm. Seo-ah's voice was measured and continuous, the way someone sounds when they're building an argument they've rehearsed. Min-jae's was quieter, shorter intervals. He was listening more than talking, which meant he was either fully convinced or fully uncomfortable, and with him, those 2 states looked identical from the outside. Amara transferred a payment clearance, confirmed a hotel reservation for the Jeju meeting, responded to a query from the legal division about a documentation gap in the Incheon shipping license. The office door opened at 11:41. Seo-ah came out first. She didn't look at Amara. She picked up her bag from where she'd set it on the corner of the reception desk. Not asked, just placed there. And she walked to the elevator with the calm of someone who had just closed a deal. Min-jae stood in his doorway. He looked at Amara. She looked back at him. She was holding a pen. There was a coffee stain on the left cuff of her blazer, From the morning. A small one. The color of weak tea. He said, "Can you come in for a minute?" Sat down. She'd been in his office hundreds of times. She knew where the loose floorboard was near the window, the one that groaned if you stepped on it wrong. She knew the temperature ran cold on the east side of the room because the vent above the window tilted wrong, and she'd submitted 2 maintenance requests about it that had never been resolved, so she'd started keeping a small space heater under her arm of the chair she usually sat in for briefings. She didn't bring the space heater today. She sat down and set her notepad on her knee out of habit. Min-jae stood with his back to her for a moment, looking out the window. That was also a habit. He processed difficult things by looking at distance. She'd learned that in the first 3 months. She'd also learned that when he stood that way, you didn't fill the silence because he was organizing something internally, and interruption made him curt and closed. So she waited. He said, "There are going to be some changes." She wrote nothing. The pen stayed still. "Seoa wants the structure of my office staff reviewed." He paused. "She's concerned about... She thinks certain roles are too centralized." "Too centralized," Amar repeated, not as a question. "She means you." He still hadn't turned around. "She means your position." The pen in Amar's hand was a cheap blue ballpoint, the kind she bought in bulk from an office supply store on the corner near her apartment. She noticed she was pressing the tip into the paper without writing anything, making a small dent. She released the pressure. "She wants the role divided," Min-jae said, "separated into departments, operations, communications, scheduling, multiple people." Amara nodded once, even though he wasn't looking at her. "She has concerns about trust, about the consolidation of sensitive information." He finally turned, and his face was what it always was, controlled, unreadable, arranged in the particular blankness that she recognized as the expression he used when he'd already made a decision and was now informing rather than discussing. "I told her I'd look at the organizational chart." "And?" Amara said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I think it's a reasonable restructuring," he said, "given the circumstances." The circumstances. His engagement, announced 2 weeks ago, to a woman Amara had never met until this morning. A strategic marriage. A union that would merge 2 crime families and eliminate the most dangerous border conflict in the syndicate's history. Hundreds of millions of dollars. A decade of peace. All reasonable, all logical, all things she understood completely. "When?" she asked. "End of the week." She looked at her notepad. The small dent from the pen was a perfect dot, no bigger than a period. "I'll prepare transition materials," she said. "I'd appreciate that. I'll need to brief whoever takes over on the active operations. Some of the Tokyo... I'll have someone from operations handle the briefings." She stopped. "The Tokyo liaison has a specific contact protocol. They won't communicate through standard operations channels. It took me 8 months to establish that relationship. I'm sure we'll manage." She looked at him. He looked back. And in 4 years of working in absolute proximity to this man, knowing his silences and his moods and the exact pitch of his voice when he was lying to other people, she had one moment, just one, where she wanted to say, "You won't manage. You know you won't manage. And you know what you're doing right now." She didn't say it. "I'll have everything ready by Thursday," she said instead. She went back to her desk. She sat down. She pulled up the transition template she'd actually created 8 months ago, because she'd always known this job was contingent, and she was the kind of person who prepared for contingencies. She began filling it in. Her hands were steady. Her chest felt like someone had removed something from it without anesthetic, not cutting, just reaching in and pulling, and the absence was enormous and shapeless, and she wasn't going to name it in the middle of the workday. She had 15 things left on the afternoon list. She started on the next one. By Wednesday evening, she had prepared 847 pages of transition documentation. Not because she'd been asked to, because she knew what would happen without it, and she couldn't make herself not know things or not care about the consequences of not knowing things, even when those consequences would fall on someone who had just ended her employment without quite meeting her eyes. She documented every active operation, every contact, their communication preferences, their sensitivities, the history of each relationship. She noted which political contacts required personal calls from Min Jae specifically and would not respond to intermediaries. She mapped out the cargo routing system she'd developed over 3 years. Not the official system, the real one, the one that accounted for the actual patterns of Port Authority inspectors, and not the theoretical schedule. She transcribed the medical appointment calendar she kept for him privately, the one that tracked the back pain he'd never disclosed to anyone because he considered it a weakness, and the blood pressure medication he'd been inconsistent about taking because he hated the side effects. She put everything into labeled folders, color-coded, indexed. Then she went through her desk. There wasn't much personal. A small photo tucked under her monitor, her younger sister's wedding, 3 years ago, the only family occasion she'd made it to since taking this job. A spare pair of reading glasses. 3 novels she'd been slowly working through on lunch breaks she rarely actually took. She packed them into a canvas tote. She made sure the coffee machine was cleaned and restocked. She watered the small plant on the windowsill, a pothos, nearly impossible to kill, which was why she'd chosen it, and wrote a small note on a sticky pad. Needs water every 10 days. Indirect light only. She set the note on top of the soil. Then she collected her encrypted phone, her biometric access cards, the 3 physical keys that opened things she'd never been officially told existed, and the USB drive with the backup cipher keys, and she walked to Min Jae's office. He was still there. It was past 9. He was often still there at 9. She set everything on his desk. He looked at the pile without touching it. The transition documents are in the shared server, she said. Folders labeled. Everything's indexed. She paused. The Tokyo liaison. His name is Hiroshi. He responds to voice call only, not text, not encrypted message. He calls every other Thursday at 6 p.m. Seoul time. You need to answer it yourself or he'll assume you're compromised. Min Jae said nothing. The Busan cargo schedule has a built-in delay on the 3rd week of every month. That's not an error, it's intentional. It accounts for the inspection rotation at the Gamcheon terminal. Don't let anyone fix it. He was looking at the wall somewhere past her shoulder. Min Jae, her voice was even. Did you hear me? He looked at her. I heard you, he said. She nodded. She picked up her canvas tote. She adjusted the strap. Take care of yourself, she said. You've been skipping your blood pressure medication again. The prescription is in the top drawer of your desk, left side. She walked to the door. Amara? She stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. She gave herself exactly 2 seconds. She counted them. And then she turned. He was standing. He'd come around the desk without her hearing him, which was unusual because she always heard him. He was 6 feet away, and his face had dropped the controlled blankness, and there was something underneath it that she didn't let herself look at too long. He stopped. Started again. You'll have no trouble finding another position. The thing in her chest twisted once and went still. I know, she said. She left. She made it to the parking garage before she stopped walking. She stood between 2 black SUVs in the 3rd basement level, where the cameras had a 7-second blind spot between sweeps. She knew that because she'd designed the security rotation, and she put her hand flat on the hood of one of the vehicles and breathed. Just breathed. Her sister called 3 times. She didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because if she heard a familiar voice right now, she would cry. And she hadn't decided yet if tonight was a night for crying or a night for not crying, and the decision felt important. She stood there for 4 minutes. Then she straightened up, adjusted the strap of her tote, walked to her car. She had some things to figure out, a lease to think about, a resume she hadn't touched in 4 years, an entire life that had become so tangled up in someone else's world that she'd have to spend a while just working out which parts of herself were still her own. But that was tomorrow. Tonight she drove home, and she did not let herself think about the plant with the sticky note, or the coffee machine she'd restocked for someone else to use, or the way he'd said her name in the doorway like he was reaching for something and then choosing not to take it. She drove home. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table and she opened her laptop and started writing a list. It was what she did when things fell apart. She made lists and she solved problems and she kept moving. She wrote, Step 1. And then she sat there for a while, in the quiet of her apartment, in the particular silence of a life that had just been hollowed out by someone who thought she was replaceable. And slowly, carefully, she began to figure out what came next. The first sign that something was wrong came at 6:47 on Thursday morning, 14 hours after Amara left the building. It was a missed call. Then two. Then a message from the Busan port coordinator, a man named Tae Young, who communicated exclusively through a secondary encrypted channel that Amara had set up 18 months ago and whose existence was not documented anywhere in the official operations system because she'd built it around a personal contact and never gotten around to formalizing it, which she'd intended to do and hadn't, and now that gap was a hole the size of a shipping container. The message said, "Cargo holding. Auth code expired. Need reissue. Who do I contact?" Park Jun-ho, Min Jae's head of security, found the message at 8:15 when he was handed Amara's encrypted phone. Still logged in, as she'd left it, because nobody had thought to transfer the contact protocols before she walked out, and nobody knew what half the contacts in the phone were for or how to respond to them without context. He stared at the message for a long time. Then he went to find Min Jae. Min Jae had slept 4 hours. He knew because he'd looked at the clock at 2 a.m. and again at 6 a.m., and the 2 hours in between had been something that wasn't quite sleep and wasn't quite waking, a gray drift where he kept reaching for something on a desk that wasn't there. He was on his second coffee, standing at the window in his office, when Junho knocked and came in without waiting. "We have a problem," Junho said. "One?" Junho set the encrypted phone on the desk, face up. "Busan cargo is frozen. The authorization code Amara used rotated last night, and nobody has the reissue protocol." Min Jae looked at the phone. "Get someone from operations to pull the protocol." "Operations doesn't have it. It wasn't in the shared system." Junho's jaw was tight. "She ran it through a secondary channel. Personal contact at the port. That contact doesn't know anyone else and won't respond to an unknown number. Then find the protocol documents. I've had 2 people looking since 6 a.m. Junho put both hands flat on the desk, which was something he never did. "Min Jae, there's nothing there. Whatever she built it in her head." The coffee in Min Jae's hand was going cold. He set it down. "How much cargo?" 3 containers, 48-hour hold before they start the inspection process. "And if they inspect?" Junho said nothing. Min Jae looked at him. "One of the containers has documentation issues," Junho said quietly. Amara was managing a rolling compliance gap on it. She'd been filing extension requests. I don't know what format, I don't know who she filed with, and as long as those extensions were active, the container wasn't flagged. "When did the last extension expire?" "We don't know." The room was very quiet. "Find out," Min Jae said. "I need the contact name and the filing reference number to find out. Which means I need Amara." Junho straightened up. "Or I need you to call her." Min Jae walked to the window. Outside, the city was doing its ordinary morning things. Traffic, delivery trucks, a woman walking a small dog on the opposite sidewalk. The kind of ordinary that felt obscene right now. "Call the operations division. All of them. Get everyone in the conference room at 10. "And the Busan situation?" "I'll handle it." He didn't say how. Junho, to his credit, didn't ask. The 10 o'clock meeting was a disaster inside a suit. 12 people sat around the conference table. Division heads, senior liaisons, the head of the legal unit. And within the first 9 minutes, it became clear that nobody had a complete picture of anything. What they had were pieces. Fragments. Each person knew their piece, but the way those pieces connected, the routing logic, the timing dependencies, the relationships between seemingly unrelated operations, that architecture lived in exactly one person's head, and that person was at home making tea. Ryu Chang-soo, head of the operations division, a heavy-set man who had been with the organization for 11 years and who had never once been wrong about a numbers projection, said, "The Tokyo Standing Order, the quarterly review. Who has the current status?" Silence. Someone had to have the current status. More silence. "She handled it," said one of the junior coordinators, a young woman named Haeji, who looked like she hadn't slept. She handled everything with Tokyo. What does that mean, she handled everything? It means she handled everything. Hieji's voice was flat, not defensive, just tired. The calls, the document relay, the schedule coordination, the cipher rotation, all of it. Chang-Su looked at Min-jae at the head of the table. What was she? Why was one person? She wasn't supposed to be one person, Min-jae said. She evolved into one person. Well, Chang-Su set down his pen with a sound that was louder than it needed to be. She's evolved out of the building, so I need to know what we do about Tokyo because they're expecting a contact confirmation by Friday, and I don't know the contact's name or the communication format or the cipher. Hiroshi, Min-jae said. His name is Hiroshi. Voice call, Thursday evenings. What's his full name? Pause. I don't know his full name, Min-jae said. What's the cipher? Another pause. Something moved across Chang-Su's face that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite contempt. It was the look of a man who has just understood the scope of a problem he didn't create. Okay, he said. He picked his pen back up. We need to make a list. The list took 2 hours. It wasn't even complete at the end. They kept discovering new gaps as the existing gaps led to adjacent gaps, and by noon the whiteboard at the front of the room was covered in red marker, and the air in the conference room smelled like stress and stale air. Junho left the meeting twice to take calls he didn't want to take in the room. When the meeting broke up at 12:40, Min-jae sat alone at the table for 6 minutes. He was counting things. Not numbers. Things. The list on the whiteboard. How many items had the word Amara written beside them in Hieji's handwriting? He counted 17 before he stopped. Yichind, Seoa called at 2. Min-jae answered on the 4th ring, which was unusual. She noticed. You sound tired, she said. I'm working. The Busan issue? Her voice was smooth. Chang-Su mentioned it to one of my father's people. Min-jae went very still. Chang-Su mentioned it. Apparently there are some operational concerns. My father is... Tell your father it's handled. Is it? The pause was a quarter second too long. It's being handled, he said. Min-jae. Her tone shifted to something almost gentle, which was its own kind of pressure. I understand that the transition is complicated. I didn't ask you to do it overnight, but if there are issues that affect my family's interests, there are no issues that affect your family's interests. The Busan containers are handled. His voice had dropped to the register he used when a conversation was over. I'll call you tonight. He hung up. He set the phone on the desk and looked at it for a moment. Then he said very quietly to the empty room, How did she know about Busan? The new temporary secretary arrived on Friday morning. Her name was Ji Yeon. She was efficient, composed, and had worked previously for the CFO of a mid-size investment firm, which was exactly the kind of background that would be catastrophically insufficient for this job, though nobody briefed her on that. She lasted until 2 p.m. The breaking point was a call from a man who identified himself only as the Southern Contact and spoke entirely in a phrase substitution code that Amara had apparently developed and never written down. And Ji-yeon had tried to respond in plain language, and the man had gone completely silent and then hung up. And 30 minutes later, Junho received an alert that a scheduled delivery had been rerouted without authorization. Ji-yeon set down her headset, picked up her jacket, and said to Junho with commendable composure, I don't think this role was accurately described to me. She was gone by 2:30. The second temporary secretary arrived Monday. She quit at the end of day 2 after discovering that the filing system she'd been given access to was a surface layer over a much larger architecture she didn't have access to, and the surface layer was essentially decorative. The third lasted 4 days. She was found at her desk at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday, not working, just sitting there staring at the wall. And when Junho asked if she was all right, she said very calmly, I've answered 43 calls today, and I didn't understand what a single one of them actually needed. The notebooks were discovered on the 9th day. Junho found them while doing a second search of Amara's old office, a room that still smelled faintly of her hand lotion, something with shea butter, and which still had the pothos plant on the windowsill with the sticky note on top of the soil, because nobody had moved either. He'd thought the office had been cleared. It had been cleared. But the bottom drawer of the secondary filing unit, a drawer that was technically labeled Miscellaneous Archive, and which nobody had opened because it was always labeled Miscellaneous Archive, contained 14 handwritten notebooks. Not reports, not official documentation, notebooks. Spiral-bound, the cheap kind, filled from cover to cover in Amar's precise, slightly slanted handwriting that got smaller toward the bottom of each page as she tried to fit more in. Junho sat down on the floor of her office and started reading. He read for 2 hours. Then he went to find Min-jae. Min-jae was in a meeting with two of his regional captains, men named Dae-won and Sung-ki, both of whom were aging and sharp, and currently very tense because 3 shipments in their corridors had experienced what Dae-won called, with visible effort at restraint, coordination failures. Junho knocked and came in. "Not now," Min-jae said. "Now," Junho said. The captains looked between them. Min-jae said to the captains, "Give us 10 minutes." When they left, Junho put the notebooks on the table, all 14 of them, stacked. "What is this?" Min-jae said. Her notebooks, from the bottom of the office archive drawer. Junho pulled one from the middle of the stack and opened it to a marked page. "Read this." Min-jae looked at the page. It was a profile. The subject was Park Junho himself, written in the third person, observational, clinical without being cold. It noted his sleep schedule, his operational instincts, his 2 blind spots, the specific type of problem he solved well, and the specific type he avoided. The fact that he was left-handed but had learned to shake hands with his right at age 12 to avoid comments. His mother's health, the dates he tended to be distracted. "She profiled me," Junho said. "She profiled every senior person in the organization. Not maliciously. Look at it. She wasn't building leverage. She was building accommodation, so she could anticipate us, so she could route problems away from us before they landed." Min-jae turned pages. Profile after profile. Captains, liaisons, allied politicians, rival contacts. The writing changed slightly for each person, warmer for some, more clinical for others. He found his own profile near the back of the 4th notebook. He sat down. Junho stood on the other side of the table and said nothing. The entry for Kang Min-jae was longer than any of the others. It began 3 years ago. He could tell from the context, from events she referenced, and it had been added to steadily since then. Not in a linear way, more like accumulation. New observations added between old ones, dates noted in the margins. He processes guilt by working harder. Watch for overextension after a difficult decision. He won't ask for help directly. He asks adjacent questions and waits for the answer to appear. He thinks no one notices the back pain. He winces when he stands up too fast from the desk chair. The chair height is wrong. I've submitted 2 requests about this. He is genuinely fair with people he respects. This is rarer than it sounds. He is genuinely careless with people he trusts. He takes their presence as given. He should stop doing that. Min-jae stopped reading. He put the notebook down. He pressed his fingers against the table. Not hard, just contact, like he needed to feel something solid. "Where are the captains?" he said. "Outside." "Send them back in. He stopped. "In 5 minutes. Junho picked up the notebooks. He started to leave. "Leave them," Min-jae said. Junho set them back down and walked out. Min-jae sat with the 14 notebooks stacked in front of him and looked at them for those 5 minutes. He didn't open any of them again. He just looked. He is genuinely careless with people he trusts. He had read that sentence twice. He could still see exactly how she'd written it. The slightly larger letters at the start of the line. The period at the end that was a little heavier than the others, like she'd paused there. He thought about her hands. The coffee stain on her cuff. The way she'd set the encrypted phone on his desk, and then told him about the blood pressure medication like she couldn't help herself, like she literally could not leave without making sure he had what he needed. The captains knocked and came back in. He closed the feeling down. He was very good at that. Tell me about the corridor failures, he said. Tech. The call from Cho Hyun-woo came on the 11th day. Min-jae didn't know who it was at first. The call came through a channel that should have been decommissioned 2 years ago, but apparently hadn't been. Amar had kept it active as a secondary failsafe, and now someone who knew it existed was using it. The voice was even, almost pleasant. I heard you're having some operational difficulties, Hyun-woo said. Min-jae said nothing. Don't bother tracing this. You don't have enough people free to trace anything right now. A small pause. I thought I'd introduce myself. Cho Hyun-woo. I think you know who I am. He knew. Hyun-woo ran the Eastern Corridor, rival territory, long-standing tension, no active conflict because conflict cost money, and both organizations were at a fundamental level run by practical men. I know who you are, Min-jae said. I've been doing some research, Hyun-woo said, about your situation, about the woman you dismissed. Another pause. Amara Johnson. Remarkable person. Min-jae's hand tightened on the phone. I had her investigated, Hyun-woo continued, in the same pleasant tone. Thoroughly. 4 years inside one of the most resource-rich criminal organizations in Asia, and she never took a thing that wasn't hers. Never used the information she had. Never made a personal call that could be characterized as a breach. He paused again, and this pause had something in it. Something like genuine interest. Do you understand how unusual that is in our world? What do you want? I wanted to offer her a position. I did, actually. Chief Operations Officer, significant compensation, authority she'd never have as a secretary. Hyun-woo's voice was smooth, and the smoothness was deliberate, designed to land. She declined. Why are you telling me this? Because she declined for reasons that are, frankly, your problem and not mine. He stopped. She's not available to you, Kang. She's moved on. She's working for an international relief organization now. Did you know that? Apparently they've already put her in charge of coordinating logistics for 3 regional operations. She's been there 10 days. The room was very quiet. But here's what I've been thinking, Hyun-woo said. You have a gap, a structural gap, and gaps in our world get filled by rivals, by mistakes, by the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of people. Another pause. I'm curious how you plan to fill yours. I'll manage my own organization, Min-jae said. I'm sure you will. Hyun-woo's voice stayed pleasant right up until the last sentence. I just wanted you to know that I'm watching, and that I find your situation educational. The call ended. Min-jae set the phone down. He stood up and walked to the window. The city outside was the same as always, indifferent, continuous, doing its own things. He thought about what Hyun-woo had said, not the threat in it, which was obvious and expected. The other part. She declined, for reasons that are your problem and not mine. He thought about the notebooks. 14 of them. He thought about the sentence. He is genuinely careless with people he trusts. He turned back to his desk. He picked up his personal phone, not the encrypted work line, his actual phone, the one that had her number in it under a contact labeled simply Office because he'd never thought to label it anything else. And he looked at it. He put it back down. He picked it up again. He had a list in front of him, compiled by Junho, of everything that had broken in 11 days. 17 active items, 4 relationships at risk, 2 political contacts who had stopped returning calls. The Busan cargo situation partially resolved at significant cost. The documentation gap still open. A temporary fix in place that Junho described as survivable for 60 days, after which we have a serious problem. 60 days. He looked at the phone. He put it down again, and this time he picked up the notebooks instead, and he sat down and he opened the 4th one to the page he'd already found, and he read the entry about himself again from the beginning, all the way to the end, and there was one line near the bottom that he hadn't finished reading the first time. He will realize this eventually. I just don't know what it will cost by the time he does. He read it twice. He closed the notebook. He set it precisely on top of the stack. Then he picked up the encrypted operations line and called Junho and said, very quietly, "Get me everything you have on Cho Hyun-woo. Everything. And I want to know which humanitarian organization she's working for and where their regional operations are based." Junho was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Min-jae, he said carefully. What are you planning? I don't know yet, Min-jae said. And that was true. He genuinely didn't know yet. But Hyun-woo had called through a decommissioned channel that only someone with specific inside knowledge would have known to use, and he'd known about Busan, and he'd known about Amara's new position, and he'd known about the offer he'd made her, and he'd said, I'm watching with the particular ease of a man who has already made his next move and is waiting to see if the other player figures out what it was. Min-jae sat in the quiet of his office, and for the first time in 11 days, the sharp, cold thing in his chest stopped being about Amara and started being about something else entirely. He'd made a mistake. That was clear. He'd understood that much after the notebooks. But Hyun-woo wasn't calling to educate him. Hyun-woo was calling because he'd already done something, or was about to, and he wanted Min-jae off balance when it happened. The question was, what was it? And then Junho called back not 30 minutes later and said, She's gone. What? Amara, the humanitarian organization's regional office in Incheon. She didn't show up this morning. Her coworkers said she left last night for a meeting. Someone came to pick her up. They said she didn't seem worried. She knew them. And she hasn't been back. The silence in the room was absolute. Hyun-woo, Min-jae said. That's my read, Junho said. Min-jae stood up. His chair rolled back and hit the wall behind him. Call the captains, he said. All of them. Min-jae, if this is Hyun-woo, going in with force will... Call them, Min-jae said. Now. He was already moving toward the door, and the cold thing in his chest had burned off entirely, replaced by something that had no name but that he recognized. The feeling that arrives when something that cannot happen has already happened, and the only question left is what you are willing to pay to undo it. Min-jae had the captains assembled in 12 minutes. That was fast, for 12 people scattered across a building that ran 3 separate security sweeps between floors. It was fast because Junho had used the emergency code, not the operational urgency code, the actual emergency code, the one that hadn't been activated in 4 years. And when that code went out, people moved without asking questions first. They filed into the secure conference room on the sublevel, the one with no windows and signal dampeners built into the walls. And they stood rather than sat because nobody had told them to sit, and the energy in the room didn't invite it. Min-jae was already there when they arrived. He was standing at the head of the table. He hadn't changed anything about his appearance, hadn't rolled up his sleeves or loosened his tie, which was how they knew he was containing something, because Min-jae only looked completely composed when something very bad had happened, and he was deciding how to respond to it. Cho Hyun-woo has Amara Johnson, he said. No preamble. She was taken last night from outside the humanitarian office in Incheon. Witnesses say she went voluntarily, someone she apparently recognized, which means he used a contact she'd met through work here, someone she had reason to trust. The room stayed quiet. I want to know who that contact is. I want to know every interaction Hyun-woo's network has had with anyone connected to this organization in the past 6 months. He looked at Daewon. Your corridor overlaps with his eastern territory at 3 points. Who are the crossover contacts? Daewon straightened. 2 freight brokers and a port official in Pohang. They're nominally neutral. Nominally, Min-jae said. I'll have answers by morning. I need them in 3 hours. He moved his gaze to Sung-ki. His known facilities. What do we have? Sung-ki was already pulling out his phone. 3 confirmed warehouse complexes, 2 residential compounds, a commercial property in Songdo. The Songdo property is new, acquired 8 months ago. We don't have the interior. Prioritize Songdo and the Incheon waterfront properties. He'll want her close to a port. He's a man who likes exits. Min-jae looked at Junho. The decommissioned channel he called through. I want to know how he accessed it. Working on it. Work faster. The captains began moving. The room decomposed from a meeting into something more like a machine engaging. People pulling phones, speaking in low, urgent voices, and Min-jae stood at the center of it and watched and felt the cold precision of crisis focus settle over him like weather. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. What he was not good at, what he had never been good at, was the thing underneath it. The part that wasn't strategy. The part that was just, she is somewhere and she is afraid, and it is because of me. He pushed it down. He would deal with it later. He was very good at later. The first breach in the plan came at 11 p.m. One of Daewon's people, a young operative named Cho Rong, not related to Hyun Woo, the name was a coincidence that nobody found funny right now, had tracked a vehicle registration through the Pohang freight broker network and landed on an address. A disused cold storage facility 20 minutes south of Incheon, on a stretch of coast that had been industrial and was now halfway between derelict and redeveloped, the kind of location that had legitimate reasons for vehicle traffic and enough surrounding noise to cover what you didn't want heard. It was a good lead, specific, cross-referenced, arrived at through 3 independent data points. Min-jae looked at it and felt, for the first time in 12 days, something that was almost relief. He said, "We move at 2 a.m., 4 teams. Junho, Daewon, Sungki, and I take the primary approach. The 4th team—" "Wait," said Junho. Something in his voice. Min-jae stopped. Junho was looking at his phone with an expression Min-jae could not immediately read, which was unusual because he could read Junho's face the way other people read weather, involuntarily, out of long practice. What he was reading now was bad. "What?" Min-jae said. Junho looked up. The channel trace came back. "And?" Junho set the phone on the table, screen up, and slid it across. Min-jae looked at the screen. It was a network map, the kind the technical team generated when tracing communication pathways, nodes, and connections in a branching pattern. At the center of the map was the decommissioned channel Hyun Woo had called through. 2 pathways led to it. One was Hyun Woo's network, which was expected. The other was internal. It traced back through 3 relay points to a device registered to the organization's own secure communication system. The device was assigned to Park Jun-ho. Min-jae did not move. He looked at the screen. He looked at Jun-ho. He looked at the screen again. The room had gotten very quiet. The other captains were looking between the 2 of them with the stillness of people who have just felt the floor shift. "Explain this," Min-jae said. Junho's face was doing something complicated. He wasn't reaching for the phone. He wasn't looking away. He met Min-jae's gaze directly, which was either the behavior of an innocent man or an extremely prepared guilty one. "I didn't know about this," Junho said. "Your device." "My device was cloned 18 months ago. The Jakarta trip, remember? The 2-day gap when I had the phone replaced because the screen cracked. Whoever did the replacement—" "Who did the replacement?" Silence. "It went through the operations supply chain," Junho said slowly. "Standard protocol. I didn't handle it personally." "Who coordinated operations supply chain 18 months ago?" The answer lived in the room for a moment before anyone said it. Amara had coordinated operations supply chain 18 months ago. Amara had coordinated everything 18 months ago. Min-jae felt something shift in his chest, something unpleasant, a new and terrible geometry. "You're saying she planted a clone," he said. His voice was very flat. "I'm not saying anything," Junho said carefully. "I'm saying the trace points to my device. I'm saying the device was out of my possession for 48 hours 18 months ago. I'm saying I don't know what happened during those 48 hours. She had access to the supply chain. She had access to everything." The words landed in the room like objects dropped from a height. Min-jae took the phone. He looked at the network map again. He followed the internal pathway with his eye, node by node, relay by relay, back to Junho's device registration. He thought about the notebooks. 14 notebooks. Profiles of every person in the organization. He'd read them as evidence of loyalty. Careful, thorough. She'd built all of this to serve, to protect, to anticipate. He thought about them now in a different light. Profiles of every person, every weakness, every blind spot, every schedule and habit and medical appointment and rotating cipher. He thought about Hyun Woo on the phone. I had her investigated. She never took a thing that wasn't hers. He thought about Hyun Woo knowing about Busan, knowing about the documentation gap, knowing about the decommissioned channel. He put the phone down. "Get the technical team back on the channel trace," he said. "I want a complete pathway audit.
Everything that moved through that device in the last 18 months. Every communication, every data transfer. That will take, I don't care how long it takes. Start now. He walked out of the room.
He stood in the corridor for a moment. The wall was cold. He put his hand against it and felt the cold and breathed. He was doing what he always did with difficult things. Building the case, laying it out, looking at what the evidence suggested. That was how he functioned. That was how he'd built everything he had. The evidence suggested a supply chain compromise 18 months ago. It suggested that whoever had access to that supply chain, and she'd had access to all of it, had been the vector for the clone. It suggested that the information Hyunwoo had about the organization's internal operations had an internal source. It suggested that source was connected to a device reassigned through Amara's coordination. The evidence suggested that the woman who'd spent 4 years quietly holding his empire together had also, quietly, been feeding information to a rival. He stood with his hand against the cold wall and tried to make himself believe it. He couldn't. Not because he was certain she was innocent. He wasn't certain of anything right now. He was certain of almost nothing. He couldn't believe it because of the notebook. He will realize this eventually. I just don't know what it will cost by the time he does. People who wrote things like that in private notebooks that they left behind in locked drawers when they were dismissed, they didn't write those things if they'd been planning to burn it all down. They just didn't. That wasn't how human beings worked. He was also aware that this logic was emotional and therefore potentially wrong, and that he needed to be careful because Hyunwoo was extremely smart, and what smart men did when they wanted to paralyze you was introduce doubt exactly where you couldn't afford it. He pushed off the wall. He went back in. The technical team came back with the pathway audit at 1:30 a.m. The device had been used as a relay for 41 communications over 18 months. None of them had originated from Junho's number. All of them had been routed through, silent, not traceable to the device itself, without this level of deep audit. 37 of the 41 communications were encrypted in a format the technical team recognized: Hyunwoo's network cipher, Eastern Corridor Standard. 4 of them were encrypted in something different, something the team hadn't seen before. "What format is this?" Minjae asked, looking at the 4 isolated communications on the screen. The technical lead, a thin young man named Byung-soo, who communicated almost exclusively in technical qualifiers, said, "It's proprietary, custom built. It's not any standard cipher we have on record." Who builds a proprietary cipher? Someone with significant technical knowledge and a specific reason not to use existing formats. Byung-soo paused. Or someone who's specifically designed it to be attributed to someone else if discovered. Minjae looked at him. "I'm saying both possibilities exist," Byung-soo said carefully. "I can tell you the cipher is custom. I can't tell you yet who built it. How long to crack it? The content? Hours, maybe. The authorship?" Byung-soo shook his head. Authorship of a custom cipher is very hard to prove, especially if it was designed to look like something else. Designed to look like something else. Minjae stood very still. "She built ciphers," Junho said from the doorway. He hadn't left. He'd been standing in the doorway since the audit came back, and his voice was careful in the way of a man who is aware that what he says next will matter. "The Tokyo cipher, the Southern Contact Phrase Substitution System. She built those." "She built them for us," Minjae said. "Yes. And they're not in any documentation. They lived in her head." "Yes." The room absorbed that. "So someone who wanted to create a cipher that looked like it came from her," Minjae said slowly, "would need to have encountered her systems, would need to have studied them closely enough to replicate the architecture." "That's one possibility," Byung-soo said. "Another is that she built it herself." "Can you tell the difference?" Byung-soo looked at him for a moment. "I need more time." "Then take the time. I want an answer before dawn." He walked out again. This time he didn't stop in the corridor. He walked all the way to the stairwell, and he climbed 3 floors because movement was the only thing that kept the inside of his head organized right now.
and he climbed until he reached the roof access door and he pushed through it into the open air, cold and salt-smelling from the direction of the coast, and he stood there. He thought about Hyun-woo calling through a compromised channel to tell him about Amara, about the offer she'd refused, about her new job, about "I'm watching." He thought about why a man would call a rival to tell him exactly where a key person was, exactly what her situation was, exactly how loyal she'd been. He thought about why 2 days later that person was taken. He thought about what Hyun-woo actually wanted. And then he thought about the cold storage facility, the lead that had come in clean and specific and cross-referenced. Too clean, too specific. He'd been about to take 4 teams into a location at 2 a.m. based on intelligence that had arrived very conveniently after a phone call designed to destabilize him. He pulled out his phone. He called Junho. "The cold storage facility," he said. "Stand down." Pause. "Min-jae, it's a prepared position. He wants us there. Whatever's waiting at that facility, it's not Amara." He leaned against the roof wall. The air was cold enough that he could see his breath. "He's running us. He's been running us since the call." Another pause, longer. "Okay," Junho said. "What do we do?" "We stop moving, and we think." He breathed out. "Get Byung-soo back on the cipher, and I need everything we have on Hyun-woo's personal preferences. Not his operations, his personal behavior. Where he takes meetings he considers important. Where he goes when he wants to feel in control of something." "That's a strange question." "He didn't take her to be used as leverage," Min-jae said. "He took her because he's genuinely fascinated by her. He told me that, almost directly. He called her remarkable. He offered her a position." He paused. "He'll keep her somewhere he considers significant, not a warehouse. Somewhere that means something to him." Silence on the line. "The Songdo property," Junho said slowly. "Tell me more about the Songdo property." "Commercial building. Acquired 8 months ago. We thought it was investment. It's in a redevelopment zone. The land value is significant. But there's a lower-level industrial spec, pre-renovation. It was listed as storage." "How big?" "Byung-soo can pull the original architectural filing. The building permit would have the square footage." "Do that. And Junho..." He stopped. "The cipher authorship. When Byung-soo has a read, I want to know immediately. Not in the morning. Immediately." "Understood." He hung up. He stayed on the roof for another few minutes. The city below him was doing its insomniac things, lights moving, the distant sound of something industrial. A siren somewhere north. He thought about her sitting at her desk at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before anyone else arrived, pressing a strip of tape over a cut on her wrist and getting back to work. He thought about what it meant that someone had built a system so embedded in a single person that when that person left, the whole architecture began to quietly come apart, like a building whose load-bearing wall you hadn't noticed until it was gone. He thought about the 4 custom cipher communications. He thought about a man smart enough to study Amara's cipher architecture closely enough to replicate it, and to plant that replication on a device that would point back to her. He thought about who that man was, and what he wanted, and how long he'd been planning it. The answer settled into place with the particular unpleasantness of things that had been true for a while before you let yourself see them. Hyun-woo hadn't moved opportunistically when she was dismissed. He'd been watching for much longer than that. He'd known about her, known her real value, her real function, while Min-jae was still handing her coffee orders and not thinking about what she was actually doing with her days. Which meant Hyun-woo had been studying Min-jae's organization from the inside using a compromised device for 18 months. Which meant he knew things Min-jae didn't know he knew, which meant this was not a kidnapping for leverage. This was the opening of something much larger and far more carefully prepared. Min-jae went back downstairs. Byung-soo had the cipher result at 4:17 a.m. He came to find Min-jae personally, which was unusual. He stood in the doorway of Min-jae's office and he held a printed analysis report and he said, "The 4 custom cipher communications were not built using Amara Johnson's cipher architecture." Min-jae looked at him. "You're certain?" "Her ciphers use a base 12 substitution framework. She's consistent. I pulled her Tokyo cipher and the Southern Contact system for comparison. Every one of her systems has the same structural signature. He held up the report. These 4 communications use a base 7 framework with false markers embedded to suggest base 12. It's a forgery, a very good forgery, but a forgery. Min-jae let out a breath that he hadn't known he was holding. Someone studied her ciphers well enough to fake one, Byung-soo continued, and they planted the fake on a cloned device registered to your head of security using a decommissioned channel from your own communications network and timed the discovery to coincide with an active crisis. He paused. This was a long-term frame, minimum 18 months of preparation, possibly longer. Hyun-woo, Min-jae said. That's not my area, Byung-soo said carefully. But the technical picture is that someone spent a significant amount of time and resources building a scenario where, if you started looking for the source of your intelligence leak, the evidence would point to Amara Johnson's cipher style in Junho's device. He paused again. It would have worked. Without a deep architecture comparison, it would have looked conclusive. Min-jae sat with that for a moment. It would have worked. He would have looked at that evidence in the middle of a crisis, with Amara missing and the organization fragmenting. And Hyun-woo's voice still fresh in his memory. I'm watching. I find your situation educational. And he would have built a case against the one person who had never once given him a reason to doubt her, and he would have believed it because he was already afraid of what he felt when he thought about her, and people find it easier to believe the version of a story that hurts less. He looked at the report. Thank you, he said. Get some sleep. Byung-soo left. Junho came in 2 minutes later. Songdo, he said. He set a tablet on the desk with an architectural filing pulled up. Floor plans, multiple levels. He pointed to the sub-level. 3,000 square meters of below-grade industrial space listed as inactive storage. But there's a separate utility connection, power, water, ventilation, filed as a building management upgrade 8 months ago, right after Hyun-woo acquired the property. Someone put the space back online, Min-jae said. Quietly. Under a maintenance contractor code. The contractor doesn't appear to be a real company. Junho straightened. If he's keeping her somewhere comfortable, somewhere he considers significant, a property he chose personally, equipped personally. It's Songdo, Min-jae said. He looked at the floor plan. The sublevel had 2 access points. One was a service corridor from the building's loading bay. One was a direct elevator from the parking structure. He'll have people in the building, Min-jae said. How many? We don't know. He'll have the exits covered. We could move in force. 8 teams, simultaneous approach. And she gets moved before we're halfway through the building, or something worse. Min-jae shook his head. He told me to come alone. No soldiers, no weapons. Junho looked at him. He told you that? Not explicitly. He said come alone would be the way this kind of message works. He's been engineering this whole situation to produce exactly one outcome. Min-jae looked at the floor plan. He wants me in front of him, without backup, because that's the version of this conversation he wants. Then don't give it to him. If I don't go, she stays there, or worse. He put the tablet down. And if I go in force, same result. So what do you do? Min-jae looked at the floor plan for a long moment. I go, he said. I go alone. And I go openly enough that he knows I've come without weapons, because he needs to believe he has control of this situation. He looked at Junho. And you move the teams into position around the building without triggering his perimeter sensors, which means I need to know exactly where his sensors are and what frequency they're running on. And you wait for a signal. What signal? Min-jae thought about it. I don't know yet, he said. But she will. Junho stared at him. She doesn't know the plan. She doesn't need to know the plan. His voice was quieter now, and something underneath it had changed. Something that wasn't operational, something that he wasn't naming out loud, but that had been building since the roof, since the notebook, since the very specific way Byung-soo had said a very good forgery, but a forgery. She just needs to be herself. That's always been enough. The room held that for a moment. Get the teams ready, Min-jae said. We move at first light.
And Junho. He paused. When this is over, there is going to be a very thorough accounting of every decision I have made in the last 3 weeks. But right now I need you to trust me one more time. Junho looked at him for a long moment. I've trusted you for 9 years, he said. One more time isn't a problem. He left. Min-jae stood alone in his office in the thin gray hour before dawn, with a floor plan on his desk and 14 notebooks stacked in the corner and the particular weight of a man who has understood completely and too late and not too late what he almost let himself lose. He straightened his tie. He picked up the floor plan. He went to find a car. The drive to Songdo took 23 minutes. Min-jae drove himself. That was the first signal. No driver, no escort vehicle, no convoy. Just him in a black sedan that he hadn't used in 8 months, that wasn't in any of the organization's registered vehicle records, that Junho had arranged through a contact so peripheral that even Hyein Woo's network would need time to trace it. He drove with both hands on the wheel and the floor plan memorized and nothing else. No weapons. He'd removed even the small ceramic blade he kept in his jacket lining, which he'd carried for 6 years, which he'd never used and hoped he would never need to use. He left it on his desk. He wasn't going in to fight. He was going in to talk and to buy time, and to trust that Junho had the teams in position and that she, wherever she was in that building, whatever state she was in, would do what she always did, which was notice things and act on them without being asked. It was not a solid plan. He was aware of that. The Songdo commercial district at 5:30 in the morning was gray and half alive, the sky just beginning to differentiate itself from the buildings. The redevelopment zone was quieter. Construction equipment parked and sheeted, new structures half finished alongside older industrial buildings that were waiting for their turn. The building he was looking for was a 12-story commercial block, glass-fronted upper floors above a concrete base, the kind of building that would be unremarkable in 6 months when the district filled in around it. Right now it was alone enough to be useful for someone who needed privacy. He parked 1 block east. He walked. There were 2 men outside the main entrance. They were dressed in the generic dark clothing of men trying not to look like what they were, and they were not especially good at it, but they weren't there to be subtle. They were there to be seen, to let him know that Hyun Woo knew he was coming, that everything was on Hyun Woo's terms. Min-jae walked up to them with his jacket open and his hands away from his body. I was told to come alone, he said. I came alone. One of the men spoke into an earpiece. Then he stepped aside. The lobby was empty. They took him to a service elevator that bypassed the main floors entirely and went down. The sublevel. The 3,000 square meters of below-grade space that had been quietly put back online 8 months ago. The elevator opened and the air changed, cooler, slightly damp, with a ventilation hum that was too new for the building's age. He was walked down a corridor and through a heavy door and into a room. The room was large. Whatever it had been originally, cold storage, equipment bay, it had been cleared and partially finished. Temporary lighting ran along the ceiling in strips, industrial white. There were chairs, a table, the particular blankness of a space that has been prepared rather than inhabited. Hyun Woo was standing near the far wall. He was smaller than Min-jae had expected. That was the first thing. The men who occupied enormous amounts of your operational attention often turned out to be physically modest in person, as though their threat had been concentrated into something efficient and compact. He was in his late 40s, well-dressed in a way that suggested money spent on quality rather than display, and he was looking at Min-jae with an expression of genuine interest. Not triumph, interest. That was the second thing, and it was the more important one. You came alone, Hyun Woo said. You knew I would. I thought you might. I wasn't certain. He tilted his head slightly. Men in your position often decide that their pride is more valuable than the person. I didn't know which kind of man you were. Min-jae looked around the room. 2 guards at the door behind him, one in the far corner positioned at an angle that covered both the door and Hyun Woo's direct line. The ventilation hum above. A secondary door to the left, sealed, but with light underneath it. He looked at the light under that door for a half-second, then back at Hyun Woo.
Where is she? He said. She's comfortable. She's not hurt. Hyunwoo moved toward the table and rested his fingers on its edge. That wasn't the point. I'm not a man who hurts people to make points. It's inefficient, and it tells the other person exactly how frightened you are. What's the point then? You. Hyunwoo looked at him with that same considering expression. I've been watching your organization for 18 months, watching it function at a level that made no sense given your actual personnel. Your captains are competent but not exceptional. Your operations division is adequate. Your legal unit is frankly mediocre. He paused. And yet your logistics network outperformed mine. Your political relationships held under pressure that should have broken them. Your intelligence on rival movements was consistently better than it had any reason to be. He spread his hands slightly. It took me a long time to find the variable. And when you found her? When I found her, I understood. Hyunwoo sat on the edge of the table. I watched her for 6 months before you dismissed her. I had her investigated. I spoke to people who'd interacted with her through the organizational surface, people who had no idea who she actually was, who just remembered her as a slightly clumsy woman who was very easy to underestimate. He paused. She gave you everything. You gave her a job title that didn't reflect what she actually did, and a salary that I assume was adequate but not extraordinary, and the experience of spending 4 years in the periphery of a man who looked through her rather than at her. Min-jae's jaw was tight. When you dismissed her, Hyunwoo said, I thought she might come to me voluntarily. I made a generous offer. She declined. He looked at Min-jae. Do you know what she said? No. She said, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not going to use what I know as a weapon, and that's all it would be in your organization, a weapon pointed at someone I've already chosen not to hurt. He paused. She was talking about you. The ventilation hummed. The light under the secondary door was steady. So you took her, Min-jae said. I needed you in front of me, and you wouldn't come for yourself. Hyunwoo looked at him calmly. This is a business conversation, Kang. Nothing more. It doesn't feel like a business conversation. It is. I want a territory agreement, Eastern Corridor exclusivity, the Pohang freight routes, and a 5-year non-interference clause on 3 political contacts I've been developing. He said it the way someone reads a list they've rehearsed, not rushed, not hesitant. In exchange, she walks out of here tonight and your organization gets a clean intelligence audit that will tell you exactly what I put in your systems over the last 18 months. All of it. No residual access. Min-jae looked at him. You framed her, he said. I built a contingency. If you'd come in force tonight, or if you'd decided she wasn't worth the exposure, I would have released the cipher evidence and let your own people dismantle your trust in her from the inside. It would have been a useful secondary outcome. He paused. But you came alone, which means that's not the conversation we're having. You spent 18 months building a frame to use against a woman who had never done anything to you. I spent 18 months building leverage, Hyunwoo said, without any particular effect. What it was aimed at was determined by circumstances. Min-jae breathed in slowly. His hands were at his sides. His jacket was open. He had nothing. No weapon, no reinforcement, no way to move on this room without getting himself and likely her killed before Junho's teams could breach the perimeter. He had words. He had time. He needed to buy enough of both. I want to see her, he said. Hyunwoo considered. Why? Because I'm not agreeing to anything I can't verify. If she's been harmed, she hasn't. Then prove it. A long pause. Hyunwoo looked at him with that assessing expression, the one that was trying to find the angle, the real purpose behind the request. 5 minutes, he said finally. He nodded to the guard in the corner, who moved to the secondary door and opened it. What? She was seated. Her wrists were zip-tied to the arms of the chair. Not tightly, he could see from the doorway that there was slack in it, which told him something about Hyunwoo's genuine intentions and also something about how she had maneuvered even that small concession. And she was in the same clothes she'd been wearing when she was taken, and her glasses were gone. She looked up when he came in. Her face did something complicated. Not relief. Not exactly. Something more layered than that. Something that moved through several stages in about half a second and then settled into a careful neutrality that he recognized as the expression she wore when she was working.
You came alone, she said. Yes. She looked at him. Her eyes went to the door behind him, open, guard visible, and then to the ventilation duct on the east wall, and then to something above his right shoulder, and he understood that she was not looking at him. She was mapping the room. Are you hurt? He said. No. She shifted slightly in the chair. The zip ties moved. He noticed her wrist, the way she was holding them, slightly angled, and there was a thin line on her left wrist, same wrist as before, same position. Not from the restraints. From something else. Something with an edge. She'd already been working on them. He didn't look at her wrists again. He looked at her face. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was low enough that it didn't carry to the door. Not for... I'll say the rest later, but I'm sorry. I need you to know that before anything else. She looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said. I need a few more minutes in there, he said. The words were for her, not for the guard. I need you to be ready. You'll know when. Her eyes moved again, above his right shoulder, to the ventilation, to the guard's position at the door, back to him. Okay, she said again. He went back out. Boten, Yunwoo was where he'd left him. She looks well, Min-jae said, as I told you. Your terms. Min-jae moved toward the table, positioning himself at an angle that put Hyunwoo to his left and the door to the right, and the guard in the corner in his peripheral vision. Eastern Corridor exclusivity, the Pohang routes, 5-year non-interference on 3 political contacts, and the intelligence audit. And the audit. He put his hands on the table. I want the audit first, before any agreement is signed, before she leaves this building. Hyunwoo tilted his head. That's not how agreements work. It's how this one works. Min-jae looked at him directly. Because you've spent 18 months inside my systems, and I'm not signing a territory agreement with a man who still has access to my infrastructure. The audit is the first condition, non-negotiable. Hyunwoo was quiet for a moment. You're stalling, he said. I'm negotiating. You're doing both. His voice was still even, but something had shifted underneath it, some small recalibration. How many teams do you have outside? Min-jae said nothing. The building has external sensors. We've been tracking approach signatures for the last 40 minutes. Hyunwoo stood up from the table. 4 positions. Northeast loading approach, the parking structure eastern face, the service corridor from the adjacent building, and, he paused, I think there's a 4th position I'm not seeing yet, which concerns me somewhat. If you knew about the teams, Min-jae said, you would have moved her already. I'm considering it. Don't. His voice dropped. Not a threat. Something more direct than a threat. Hyunwoo, you're a practical man. You said so yourself. Moving her now turns this into a fight, and a fight in this space kills people on both sides. And you walked out of your way to tell me this was a business conversation. He paused. So let's have the business conversation. Hyunwoo looked at him. The guard in the corner had moved slightly, hand closer to his jacket. The 2 at the door behind Min-jae were still. You don't have the authority to give me the Eastern Corridor, Hyunwoo said. Not unilaterally. Your captains would revolt. My captains will accept what I negotiate. With a gun to your head. Without one. Because I'll go back and explain the situation, and the territorial concession will be the cost of a mistake I made, and they'll understand that cost even if they don't like it. He held Hyunwoo's gaze. What they will not accept is an ongoing intelligence compromise, so the audit is still first. A long silence. The ventilation hummed. Sit down, Hyunwoo said. Min-jae sat. Hyunwoo pulled out a phone. He dialed a number and spoke 3 words into it that Min-jae didn't catch and then set it on the table. My technical person will begin compiling the audit. It will take time. How long? An hour, perhaps 90 minutes. Min-jae nodded. 90 minutes. Junho had the building surrounded and was waiting for a signal. 90 minutes of a conversation he had to sustain in a room with a man who was several moves ahead of him in a game that had been going on for 18 months. He could do 90 minutes. He was good at later. They talked for 40 of those minutes. It was the strangest 40 minutes of Min-jae's professional life. A genuine conversation, operational and intelligent, between two men who were in the middle of a standoff and both aware of it and neither pretending otherwise. Hyun-woo asked about the Tokyo liaison. Min-jae didn't confirm the name, but talked around the relationship structure, and Hyun-woo listened with the focused attention of a man who was not going to forget anything. At one point, Hyun-woo said, "You know what she told me when I asked why she declined the position?" "You told me what she said." "Not all of it." He paused. "She said, 'The strongest systems are built on trust. If I came to you, I'd be building yours on a betrayal, and everything I built for you would have that underneath it. That's not a foundation, that's a trap.'" He looked at Min-jae. "I thought about that for a week. I still think she's right." Min-jae said nothing. "She's wasted in your organization," Hyun-woo said. It wasn't cruel, it was almost wistful. "She's wasted in most organizations. She functions at a level that most structures can't contain. She was doing the work of 8 people and calling it secretarial." "I know." "Do you?" "I know now." Hyun-woo looked at him for a long moment. "What will you do about it?" "That depends on what happens in the next 50 minutes, Min-jae said. And then the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual dimming, total darkness, instant, and in the half-second before anyone reacted, Min-jae was already moving, out of the chair, left, away from where Hyun-woo's voice had been, dropping low. He heard the guard in the corner moving, heard the two at the door shift, heard Hyun-woo say something sharp in Korean that meant lights. Now, get the lights. The backup power came on in 4 seconds. Emergency strips only. Low red-tinted lighting that turned everything into shadow and silhouette. In those 4 seconds, something had changed. The secondary door was open, not ajar, open. And the guard who had been stationed near it was on the floor. Min-jae looked at the open door and then at the room, and he understood in the same instant that Jun-ho had cut the external power, which was not the signal they'd discussed because they hadn't discussed a signal. He'd told her she'd know when, and apparently she'd decided that she was not going to wait for when, and that she had used the darkness and the 4 seconds to do something with the slack in those zip ties and the thin red line on her wrist that had not been from the restraints. She'd had something with an edge. She'd been working on the ties since before he arrived. Hyun-woo was shouting now. Not panicked, controlled shouting, commands, pulling his own phone out for light. The guard from the corner had his weapon drawn and was sweeping the room. Min-jae was already through the secondary door. The corridor beyond was dark, except for the emergency strip lighting running along the floor, and she was in it, moving away from him at a pace that was not quite a run, favoring her right side, which meant something had happened to the left, which meant the guard on the floor had not gone down without a fight. "Amara," he said. She turned. In the red-tinted emergency light, her face was set and her glasses were gone, and there was a cut on her left forearm that was bleeding in a thin, steady line. "How many teams outside?" she said. Not a greeting, not a pause for the circumstances, just the next necessary question. 4 positions. Jun-ho is running them. East side of the parking structure has a sensor blind spot, between the 2nd and 3rd support columns. If your teams aren't in it, Hyun-woo's people can cut off the ground-level exit. He stared at her. "The ventilation layout," she said. "I spent 14 hours in that room. I had time to look at things." She glanced behind him. "We need to move." He pulled out his phone, not encrypted, just his personal device, and called Jun-ho. "Parking structure east side," he said. 2nd and 3rd support columns. Sensor blind spot. Cover it now. "Already moving," Jun-ho said, and then the line filled with noise, boots, shouted commands, the industrial clang of a door being forced, and Min-jae understood that the breach had already started, that cutting the power had been Jun-ho's signal to move, that the 90 minutes had just collapsed. "Stay behind me," Min-jae said. "I'm not going to do that," Amara said, and started moving up the corridor. He followed her. The corridor connected to the service passage that ran beneath the building's loading bay. She knew this because she'd asked the guard who brought her meals, a young man who was, she'd assessed, uncomfortable with the situation and responsive to a tone of reasonable practicality, 3 casual questions over 14 hours that together mapped the below-grade layout. She hadn't told Min-jae this. There wasn't time. She led him through 2 turns in the low emergency lighting, her right hand trailing the wall, her left arm pressed against her side where it hurt, and he stayed close enough that she could hear him breathing. Quick but controlled. He was scared. She knew what scared sounded like on him because she'd heard it twice in 4 years, in the particular way his exhales shortened. She found the service passage door, and it was locked. Steel, flush frame, no visible mechanism on this side. She stopped. He was right behind her. "Move," he said. "It's locked from the—" He put his shoulder into the door. It didn't move. He did it again, harder, and the frame cracked at the upper corner, and he hit it a 3rd time and it swung. His shoulder was going to be damaged. She filed that away for later. The service passage beyond smelled of concrete and diesel and cold air, and at the far end of it was a steel roll-up door that was closed and another door to the left that was not. She went left. They came up through a stairwell that delivered them into the ground floor loading bay, just as the sound of the breach hit from multiple directions simultaneously. Boots on concrete, orders shouted, the particular percussion of a building being entered by people who knew how to enter buildings. 2 of Hyun-woo's men were in the loading bay. They turned. Min-jae was in front of her, and he had nothing. No weapon. Nothing. And the first man was already raising his arm. The second man's arm was raised too, and there was a moment, a very specific fraction of a second, where Amara calculated angles and distances and the position of the roll-up door mechanism to her right, and she made a decision. She hit the roll-up door mechanism with her right elbow. The door engaged, loud, grinding industrial motor fighting the locked position, and in the half-second that both men's attention broke to the sound, she grabbed the length of steel pipe that had been leaning against the wall since she'd noticed it coming through the door, and she swung it at the first man's arm as hard as she could from the side. She was not strong, she knew that. She wasn't aiming for force. She was aiming for his gun hand. The pipe connected at the wrist, and the weapon hit the concrete, and Min-jae was already moving, reaching for the weapon, and the second man tackled him from the side, and they went down hard, and she grabbed the fallen weapon off the concrete and pointed it at the second man and said very clearly, "Stop." He stopped. He looked at her. She was holding the gun in both hands, forearms shaking slightly, the cut on her left arm seeping through her sleeve, her reading glasses gone, her hair half out of its pins, and she held the weapon in a stance that was technically imperfect but geometrically unambiguous. She had never fired a gun in her life. She was aware of that. She was also aware that the man in front of her did not know that. "Get up," she said to Min-jae. He got up. His face was bleeding from somewhere above the left eyebrow. He looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on him before and did not have time to interpret. "Door," she said. He went to the loading bay side door. It was locked. He looked at the weapon in her hands and looked at the lock. "Do you know how to—" "No," she said honestly. "But Junho's people are outside." She fired once at the door's locking mechanism. The shot was so loud in the enclosed space that her ears went to a single sustained note that blanked out everything else. The recoil hit her wrists. The lock was not destroyed. She'd hit the door plate adjacent to it, which she'd aimed at deliberately because the actual lock mechanism was smaller than she'd thought. It didn't matter. The shot was a signal. 30 seconds later, the door came in from the outside, and Junho was in the frame with 2 people behind him, and he looked at Amara holding a weapon with her arm shaking and Min-jae bleeding above his eyebrow, and he said, with enormous composure, "Are you both alive?" "Yes," Min-jae said. "Hyun-woo?" "Sublevel. He'll try for the parking structure." Min-jae was already moving. "Take her to the vehicles. Don't let her—" "I'm not going to the vehicles," Amar said. She lowered the gun. Her arms were shaking badly now. "I'm going with you." "Amara, shh." "The sniper position," she said. He stopped. She held his gaze. "When they brought me in last night, I was in a vehicle that came from the north side of the building. The driver acknowledged a radio check from a position on the upper floor of the structure to the northeast." She paused. "I counted 4 floors. The radio frequency was a short burst, not standard sweep. That's a dedicated position. A sniper." The silence lasted less than 2 seconds. "Which window?" Junho said. "Northeast corner, 4th floor. The window was dark, but the frame had been modified. I saw it when they brought me out of the vehicle. The frame profile was wrong for standard glazing. Junho spoke into his earpiece. Fast, specific. Min-jae looked at her. How did you see that? It was dark. It wasn't completely dark, she said. And I was looking. She pressed her right hand against her left forearm where the cut was. I always look. He took half a step toward her. Min-jae, Junho said sharply. From below them, the sublevel stairwell, somewhere in the building's structure, a sound rose that was shouting and running, and something heavier, and then a single shot, and then more shouting, and Junho's earpiece erupted with voices. They've got Hyun-woo at the parking structure, Junho said. He looked at Min-jae, and the northeast position. The sniper's been neutralized. Your man was exactly where she said. The building around them was settling into the particular aftermath quiet of a place where the main noise has stopped and the secondary sounds are beginning. Radios, distant voices, the structural hum of a building returning to itself. Min-jae was looking at her. She was still pressing her hand to her forearm. Her face was pale under the fluorescent lights of the loading bay, and she was still. And her expression had finally let go of the working face, the processing face, the look of a woman calculating angles and distances, and underneath it was something raw and exhausted and human. You're bleeding through your sleeve, he said. I know. I know, she said again. Not rejecting it, just acknowledging it, just giving herself a second. He reached out slowly and put his hand over hers where she was pressing it against the cut, adding his pressure to hers, and she let him, and they stood like that in the loading bay with Junho 3 feet away and the building coming back to life around them. I have a lot to say to you, Min-jae said quietly. I don't know where to start. She looked at him. Her eyes were wet. She blinked once, deliberately, the way a person does when they've decided not to cry in the next 5 minutes and need to hold the line. Start with the blood pressure medication, she said. You stopped taking it again. I can tell by the way you're holding your jaw. He laughed. It was short and rough and surprised him. He hadn't laughed in... he didn't know how long. Amara, he said. Later, she said. Her voice was steady. You said later. So, later. And around them the building finished its settling, and Junho's voice in his earpiece said that Hyun-woo was in custody, and the perimeter was secure, and the first gray light of a proper dawn was beginning to come through the loading bay's upper ventilation slats, thin and cold and entirely indifferent to everything that had just happened. They took Hyun-woo out through the parking structure in zip ties, which Amara noted was a particular symmetry she didn't comment on. She sat in the back of one of Junho's vehicles while a man named Seok-jin, who was technically a driver but had field medical training because Amara had cross-trained all the drivers 18 months ago, and apparently nobody had reversed that protocol, cleaned and dressed the cut on her forearm. It was deeper than she'd initially assessed. The piece of broken chair bracket she'd used to work through the zip ties had a rough edge, and she'd been working fast in the dark, and she'd cut herself twice before she'd gotten through the plastic. Seok-jin worked carefully and didn't ask questions. She appreciated that. Through the vehicle window, she could see Min-jae standing 20 feet away, talking to Junho. His jacket was off. Someone had cleaned the cut above his eyebrow and put a butterfly closure on it, and he was going to have a scar there, small and diagonal, which she already knew he would refuse to consider getting looked at by a proper physician for at least 3 weeks, and which would therefore heal slightly crooked. She looked away from the window. You're going to need stitches, Seok-jin said. I know. I can do them here, or... Do them here, she said. I don't want to go to a hospital tonight. He nodded and opened a different part of the kit. She looked back out the window. The building was lit now, her teams moving through it, the systematic post-operation sweep that Junho ran with the particular thoroughness of a man who had once missed something on a sweep and never forgotten it. The northeast building across the street was also lit, upper floors, where the sniper position had been. She thought about the sniper, the modified window frame she'd seen for 3 seconds from the back of a vehicle in partial darkness while her wrists were zip-tied and her mind was running 17 simultaneous calculations. She'd almost not said anything. Not because she didn't see it, but because for one specific moment, maybe 2 seconds, in the loading bay with her arms shaking and the gun lowered, she'd thought, if I don't say anything, this ends faster and we leave. She'd said something anyway because that was just who she was, and she'd accepted that about herself a long time ago. The needle went in. She breathed out through her nose and held still. Yun-woo was put in a vehicle and taken to a location that Amara didn't ask about and didn't need to know about, and she was aware that what happened to him in the next 12 hours was going to be determined by men operating in the part of the world she had always worked adjacent to but never inside, and she let that awareness sit without examining it too closely. What she knew was this: Hyun-woo was not going to be released. The intelligence audit he'd offered, the documentation of everything he'd put inside Min-jae's systems over 18 months, that was going to happen whether he cooperated or not, because Byung-soo was going to pull it out of the technical infrastructure piece by piece regardless, and it was going to take weeks, and it was going to be expensive, and some of the damage was not going to be repairable. That was the actual cost of the last 18 months. Not the kidnapping, not the standoff. The 18 months of quiet infiltration that had been ongoing while she was still in the building, while she'd been doing her job 8 rooms away and had not caught it. That was the thing she was going to have to sit with. She had not caught it. She ran through it while Seok-jin finished the stitches. The cloned device had gone through a supply chain she coordinated. She had not flagged the 48-hour gap in Junho's phone possession as a security concern because a cracked screen was not a security concern. She had not audited the decommissioned channel because decommissioned channels were, by definition, supposed to be inactive. She had missed it. She was not infallible. She had never believed she was infallible. But there was a difference between knowing you could miss things theoretically and sitting in the back of a vehicle at 6 a.m. with 7 stitches in your arm, knowing that a specific thing had been missed and you were the person most likely to have caught it. She accepted that. She put it somewhere she could look at it later, honestly, without flinching from it. Seok-jin tied off the last stitch and wrapped the forearm in clean gauze and said, "Done." And she said, "Thank you." And she meant it. Min-jae came to the vehicle when Junho went back inside. He opened the rear door on the opposite side and sat down and closed the door, and they were alone in the back of the vehicle with the dome light off and the dawn coming in gray through the windows. He looked at her arm. The gauze was already showing a faint pink circle above the wrist. "How bad?" he said. 7 stitches. Not deep enough to worry about long term. He nodded. He looked at his hands for a moment. He had a bruise developing across the knuckles of his right hand from the altercation with Hyun-woo's man, the one who'd tackled him, and the butterfly closure above his eyebrow had a small dark ring beginning to form around it. They were both going to be sore for a week. "I need to tell you some things," he said. "I've been organizing them since the roof." "Okay." He looked at her. "Not here. Not tonight. You need sleep, and I need to say them correctly, and I can't do that at 6 in the morning after that." He paused. "But I need to say one thing now." She waited. "The notebooks," he said. She went very still. Junho found them, 14 of them, in the archive drawer. He held her gaze. "I read mine." She'd left them deliberately. She understood that about herself now, sitting in this car. She'd known she was leaving them. She'd known someone would eventually find them. And she'd left them anyway because she was incapable of taking knowledge out of a space where it might be needed, even when the space no longer had anything to do with her. "All of it?" she said. "All of it." He didn't look away. "Including the last line." She knew which line he meant. She'd written it at 2 in the morning, 14 months ago, after he'd made a decision that cost 3 good contacts in the Daegu corridor, and he'd known it was the wrong decision and made it anyway out of pride. And she'd sat at her desk after everyone left and she'd written, "He will realize this eventually. I just don't know what it will cost by the time he does." She'd meant it generally. She'd meant it about a lot of things. "I'm sorry," she said, "that I was keeping them. It wasn't—" "Don't apologize for the notebooks," he said. The words were firm, not harsh. "Don't apologize for any of it. That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the sounds of the operation, vehicles, voices, the systematic noise of men finishing work, continued at a remove that felt very far away. "I'm saying I read everything you wrote about me," he said finally, "and it was the most honest account of who I am that I have ever encountered. And I've spent 4 years not looking at you properly, and I need you to know that I know that." Her throat was tight. She didn't say anything. "Later," he said, using her word back at her. "I'll say the rest later. I just needed you to know it was coming." He paused. "Can Seokjin take you somewhere? You shouldn't be alone tonight." "I'm fine alone." "Amara." "I have a sister," she said. "I'll call her." He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more and was holding it, which she recognized, which she'd always recognized. "The blood pressure medication," she said. He looked at her. "In your desk. Top drawer left side. I said it when I left, but I know where it is." "You haven't been taking it." "I know." "Minjae." Her voice was very quiet. "Take the medication." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "I'll take the medication." She nodded. She looked at her hands. "Go finish the operation," she said. He got out of the vehicle. He stood outside the door for a moment with his hand on the frame, not moving, and then he closed it and walked back toward the building, and she watched him go until he was inside, and then she leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. She was so tired. Not the tired that sleep fixed. The other kind. The kind that accumulates over years of carrying things quietly, of being the person who notices and does and manages and remembers, of making herself small enough to fit inside someone else's world without disturbing its shape. She was so tired of that. She opened her eyes. She pulled out her phone. They'd returned it when they found her. Hyun-woo had been thorough about the comfortable conditions, and she called her sister. It rang 4 times. Then her sister's voice, rough with sleep. "Amara? It's 6 in the morning." "I know. I'm sorry." A pause. The sound of her sister sitting up, sheets moving. "What happened?" "A lot," Amara said. "Can I come over?" "Obviously." No hesitation. "Are you okay?" She thought about the question with genuine consideration, which was not how she usually answered it. "I think so," she said. "I think I'm going to be." Jack. She slept for 11 hours at her sister's apartment. Not straight through. She woke twice. Once at noon when a truck outside backfired and she sat up with her heart going before she understood where she was, and once at 3 in the afternoon for no reason she could identify, just consciousness arriving unasked. Both times she lay back down and went back to sleep, which was itself unusual. She was not a person who went back to sleep easily. Her sister brought her food when she woke properly at 5 in the evening. Juk, rice porridge with a soft egg and scallions, and something her sister put in it that she'd never reverse-engineered despite years of trying. She ate all of it at the kitchen table while her sister sat across from her and told her about an argument she'd had with her landlord and a television show she'd been watching, and various small, ordinary things that had been happening in an ordinary life that had continued without interruption while Amara's had been unraveling. She listened to all of it. She asked questions. She ate the porridge. At 7 o'clock she said, "Can I borrow some clothes?" Her sister looked at her for a moment, a long moment, the kind where a person is deciding how much to ask, and then said, "Sure. Where are you going?" "To deal with something," Amara said. The last part of it, untaite. The humanitarian organization's regional office was in a building in central Incheon that had once been a textile warehouse and had been repurposed over 15 years into something that smelled of printer ink and carpet cleaner and the particular busyness of people trying to fix problems with inadequate resources. Amara had worked there for 10 days before she was taken. She went back at 8 o'clock in the evening and used her access card, which still worked. Nobody had deactivated it in the chaos, or perhaps nobody had thought to. And she sat at the desk that had been assigned to her, and she looked at the materials she'd left there. Her operations assessment, the logistics restructuring she'd started on day 3, because the existing system was losing 40% of its delivery efficiency to a scheduling conflict that had been present for 2 years, and that 3 different people had tried to fix through individual workarounds instead of addressing the root structure. She'd been 2 days from having a working solution. She picked up where she'd left off. She worked until midnight. When she left, she slipped a note under the regional director's door explaining her absence, the solution she'd implemented, and the projected efficiency improvement. She wrote it in plain language, specific and detailed, without over-explaining or apologizing. She walked to her car in the empty parking lot. She sat for a moment before starting it. She thought about Min Jae saying, "I need to say them correctly." She thought about the notebooks, all 14 of them, everything she'd seen and noticed and written down in the quiet of offices after everyone else had gone home. She thought about 4 years of being the person who was always slightly behind the camera, making sure the scene was right, making sure nothing fell apart, making sure he had what he needed before he knew he needed it. She thought about the last line. "He will realize this eventually. I just don't know what it will cost." She started the car. She drove home. He called 3 days later. Not his operations line, his personal phone. The one with her number in it under the contact labeled office that she'd noticed 2 years ago and had never mentioned because it wasn't her business how he labeled his contacts. She was at her desk at the humanitarian office when the call came in. She looked at the number for one ring and then answered. "How's the arm?" he said. 7 days out. It's healing." "Good." A pause. "I told you I had things to say, and then I waited 3 days to say them." "I noticed." "I was trying to do it right." His voice was careful. Not the operational voice, not the command register she knew from 4 years of meetings and crises, something lower. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" She looked around the office. 2 colleagues across the room, neither paying attention. "Give me a minute." She walked to the exterior stairwell and sat on the top step and said, "Okay?" He was quiet for a moment, and she understood he was organizing again, the way he always did with difficult things, and she did not fill the silence. "I dismissed you," he said, "because Seoa asked me to, and I made a calculation. I decided the alliance was more important than... I told myself you could find other work. I told myself the organization would adapt." A pause. "I didn't ask myself what it cost you. I didn't ask you anything. I just made a decision about your life and presented it to you as a conclusion." She listened. "The notebooks," he said. "I've read them all now. Not just mine. All of them." Another pause. "You saw everything, every person in that organization, their fears, their habits, what they needed, what they were getting wrong. You saw it all and you used it to help them, not to protect yourself, not to build leverage." His voice had something in it that she'd heard maybe twice in 4 years, a roughness underneath the control. "You had more information about that organization than anyone alive, and you walked out of it with a canvas tote and a note about a plant." She put her hand flat against the concrete of the step, cold, solid. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is no." "Okay." "I want to offer you a position, not the same position, not secretary, not the role you had, which was never titled correctly and was never compensated correctly, and which I let you occupy without fully acknowledging what it actually was." A pause. "Chief Operations Officer, full authority over the operational structure, your own division, your own staff, your decisions. No intermediary." He stopped. "No one telling me you need to go." The stairwell was quiet. She could hear the building through the fire door behind her, printers, voices, the small constant noise of an organization in motion. "Min Jae," she said, "I know what you're going to say." "Do you?" "You're going to say you've started something here and you don't want to walk away from it." She thought about that. "That's part of it." "What's the other part?" She looked at the wall across the stairwell. Someone had taped a notice there at some point. It had been there when she arrived, a building safety notice, in Korean and English, edges curling at the corners. She looked at it and thought about how to be honest. "The other part," she said slowly, "is that I need to know what I'm walking back into is different. Not just the title, not just the compensation." She paused. "I need to know I'm not walking back to be useful and invisible again. I need to know you see the difference between those two things." A long silence. "I see it," he said. "Min Jae, I see it," he said again. "I saw it when I read the notebooks. I saw it in that building when you were telling me about the sniper position with blood coming through your sleeve and your hands were shaking, and you were still solving the problem because that's who you are." His voice was steady, careful. "I have spent 4 years treating your presence as furniture, and I am done with that. I am done with it in every way." She was quiet. "I'm not asking for an answer today," he said. "I'm not asking for an answer this week. I'm telling you the offer exists and it will continue to exist, and I will wait for whatever answer you arrive at." Another pause. "I'm also going to say one more thing, and then I'll let you go. Okay? It's not just professional," he said. "I'm aware of that. I've been aware of it for longer than I acknowledged, which is consistent with most of my failures of honesty." A breath. "I'm not asking you to take that into account right now. I'm just telling you it's true." She sat on the step and felt the concrete cold through her sister's borrowed jeans and looked at the curling safety notice and breathed. "Take your blood pressure medication," she said. He made a sound that might have been almost a laugh. "Already." "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She hung up. She sat there for another few minutes, alone in the stairwell, in the quiet between one thing and another. 1. She gave herself 3 weeks. She finished the logistics restructuring at the humanitarian office. She saw it through to implementation, the actual rollout, the training. The first 2 weeks of operation to verify the efficiency improvement was real and sustainable and not a projection on a spreadsheet. It was real. 43% improvement in delivery timing. She documented it cleanly and handed it to the regional director with a note about who on the existing team was best positioned to maintain it. She worked. She slept. She had dinner with her sister twice. She read one of the novels she'd brought out of Min Jae's building in her canvas tote, the one she'd been working through on lunch breaks for 7 months. And she finished it, which felt like completing something, though she couldn't have said exactly what. She talked to Min Jae 4 times in those 3 weeks. 3 of those conversations were short. He called to update her on specific operational things, the intelligence audit progress, the status of the Busan situation, the political contacts who had needed reassurance. He relayed information to her not because he needed her input, but because she was going to encounter it eventually, and he wanted her to have the full picture first. The 4th conversation was longer, 40 minutes. She didn't remember afterwards what they'd talked about specifically. It moved between the audit and a Jeju logistics issue, and something he'd read and a question she had about the Tokyo relationship and whether Hiroshi had been properly transitioned. It moved like a conversation between 2 people who had been talking for years and were getting back to something. When she hung up, she sat for a while. Then she called him back. "Yes?" he said, slightly surprised. "Monday," she said. "I'll be there Monday." A pause. Then, "Okay. I want my own office, not adjacent to yours. Done. I want direct reporting authority over operations, communications, and the legal division's operational interface. Done. I want my title on the door. It'll be there before you arrive." She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "And I want to know about the engagement. What happened with Seo Ah?" A short pause. "It was canceled. 2 weeks after Songdo. Her family was informed." He paused again. "She wasn't heartbroken. I don't think she was interested in me specifically. She was interested in the alliance." The alliance fell through? The alliance restructured, through different terms, without a marriage component. He paused. "Junho negotiated it. He was very good at it, actually. I think you should know that." "I always knew that," she said. "I wrote it in the notebooks." A brief silence, and then he said quietly, "I know. I read it." She arrived on Monday at 7 a.m. The building was the same. The lobby had the same marble, the same security desk, the same elevator that ran slow on the way to the upper floors because she'd submitted 3 maintenance requests about it over 4 years, and none of them had been resolved. She pressed the button and waited. Junho was in the lobby. He looked at her when she came in, and for a moment neither of them said anything, which was unusual because Junho was a man who generally filled silences with operational information. "Your office is on the 8th floor," he said finally. "Corner, south-facing." "Good light," she said. I thought you'd want good light. She looked at him. He looked back. He was a large, quiet man who had worked in this organization for 9 years and who she had profiled in the third notebook, page 47, in an entry she'd written with genuine respect for how well he understood the gap between what an organization was supposed to do and what it actually needed to do. She hadn't written anything about the cloned device. She hadn't known about the cloned device. But she'd written that he was the kind of man who took borrowed trust seriously, and that was, she thought, still true. I didn't catch the supply chain compromise, she said. I should have. He met her gaze steadily. I didn't catch that my device was cloned. I should have. A pause. We both missed it, he said. Yes. Then we move forward, he said. She nodded. He handed her a key card. Your biometric is already registered, and the elevator maintenance request. I flagged it as critical infrastructure this time. They're coming Wednesday. She looked at the key card. You flagged it critical infrastructure? You submitted it as standard maintenance 3 times. I figured the category was the problem. She almost smiled. I'll remember that approach. I assumed you would, he said. She went to the elevator. He went back to his desk. The choice. The 8th floor was quieter than the floors she'd worked on before. Her office had good light, as Junho had said. The south-facing windows looked over a stretch of the city that included a small park she'd walked through twice, years ago, on lunch breaks she'd taken in the first month before she stopped taking them. The room had a desk, 2 chairs, a bookshelf, a window ledge that was empty. The nameplate on the door said, Amara Johnson, Chief Operations Officer. The font was slightly too large for the nameplate frame. Someone had done it in a hurry. She set her bag down. She set up her laptop. She placed her spare reading glasses in the top right drawer of the desk where she always kept them. She looked at the empty window ledge. She was going to need a plant, something low maintenance. Indirect light was fine. She sat down and opened her laptop and looked at the operations overview that Byung-soo had sent her the night before. 62 pages of current status, gaps, and open items. And she began to read. Buan. Min-jae came to her office at noon, not to her desk outside his office. Her office. He knocked, which was also new, not because he'd been discourteous before, but because he'd never needed to knock before. She'd always been in a space that was functionally an extension of his. Come in, she said. He came in. He looked at the space. The desk, the laptop, the reading glasses, the nameplate that he'd apparently seen already, because his expression when he looked at it was the expression of someone who has noticed something is slightly wrong and is deciding whether to say anything. The font, he said. It's fine. It's too large. Min-jae, it's fine. He looked at her. She looked back. This was different. She was aware of it being different. The geometry of it. Him standing in her doorway rather than her standing in his. Him coming to find her rather than her always already being there. It was a small difference and a very large one at the same time. I have the Busan status update, he said. I read Byung-soo's report this morning. I have questions about the documentation gap timeline. Sit down and tell me. She looked at him. This is my office. A pause. Yes, he said. It is. So you sit down, she said. He pulled out the chair across from her desk and sat down. She turned her laptop screen slightly so he could see the relevant section of the report, and she began to ask her questions, and he answered them, and she pushed back on 2 of the answers with specific data points from the report that contradicted what he was saying, and he recalibrated, and she made notes. It was not a different dynamic, not entirely. They were too well matched in their work for it to be entirely different. She still knew his operational thinking better than anyone. She still caught the edges of his reasoning before he stated them. He still watched her face when she was reading something because her expression told him whether the information held up. But it was different in the way that mattered. She was on her own side of the desk. When the Busan discussion was finished, he didn't leave immediately. He looked at her window ledge. It needs something, he said. I know. I'm going to get a plant. I'll have someone bring one up. I'll get my own plant, she said. He looked at her. Something in his face, not quite a smile. The thing that existed in the neighborhood of a smile on a face that didn't do it easily. Okay, he said. He stood up. He moved toward the door. Min-jae. He stopped. She was looking at her laptop. She wasn't looking at him. Thank you, she said, for coming alone. For... She stopped. Started again. For coming. He stood in the doorway of her office for a moment. It wasn't a hard decision, he said. That's the thing I need you to understand. When it came to it, it wasn't difficult. I didn't choose between you and anything else. He paused. You were the thing I was choosing. She looked at the screen. The document on it was 62 pages of operational problems, which was good. She was going to need something to do with her hands for the next few minutes. Close the door on your way out, she said. He closed the door. She sat in the quiet of her own office, in the good south-facing light, and she breathed for a moment. Then she opened a new document, and she started writing. Not a profile, not an operational note, just things she was thinking, observations she was making, about herself this time, about the shape of the next chapter of something she didn't have a name for yet. She wrote for 20 minutes, and then she stopped and saved it and put it in a folder she labeled, after a moment's consideration, Miscellaneous Archive. She smiled at that. Then she pulled up the operations report and got to work. 3 months later, at the largest gathering in the syndicate's history, it was Amara who organized the seating. She hadn't planned to. She'd planned to handle the operations side, security rotation, transportation logistics, the political coordination required when you put that many powerful and mutually suspicious people in one room, and leave the ceremonial elements to someone else. But the ceremonial elements had begun to drift by Wednesday, 2 days before the event, and she'd stepped in because drifting logistics was the thing she was constitutionally incapable of leaving alone. And by Thursday afternoon, she'd restructured the entire program and the seating and the flow of the evening, and it was better, objectively, and she was aware of the irony and decided not to think about it. The gathering was in a hotel that had hosted 3 political summits and 1 very discreet international negotiation, and the main room held 300 people who collectively represented more concentrated power than most mid-sized governments. They came from Seoul, Busan, Tokyo, New York, allied families, political contacts, business partners who did not ask certain questions. Amara stood at the back of the room during the opening remarks, earpiece in, tablet in hand, watching the room the way she always watched rooms, for the thing that was slightly wrong before it became actually wrong. She caught 2 things before dinner was served. A seating conflict between 2 Tokyo delegates that hadn't been in the briefing materials because it was personal rather than professional, and she had them quietly repositioned through the floor manager before anyone arrived at the wrong table, and a security coverage gap on the west exit that she radioed to Junho's team. Junho, over the earpiece, I see it. 3rd pillar from the left. Already moving. She lowered her tablet. Min-jae was at the front of the room. He'd been speaking for 20 minutes, and he was good at this. The composed authority, the precision of language, the way he inhabited a room without seeming to take up space deliberately. She had watched him do this for 4 years from behind a different set of notes. She watched him do it now from the back of the room, as herself. He said, "There is something I want to say before we close this portion of the evening, something I should have said publicly a long time ago." The room settled. She looked at her tablet. "Every operation credited to this organization over the last 4 years," he said, "has been built on a foundation that most of you were not aware of. The logistics network, the political relationships, the intelligence architecture, the internal systems that have allowed us to function at the level we function at. These were not built by me." A pause. "They were built by one person, working quietly and without adequate acknowledgement, in a role that was titled incorrectly and never fully described to anyone, including me." She kept her eyes on her tablet. "Amara Johnson has been our Chief Operations Officer in function for 4 years. As of 3 months ago, she holds that title formally, and the authority that should have accompanied it from the beginning." He paused. "I want to say, in this room, in front of everyone who has benefited from her work, I made an error in judgment. I prioritized the wrong things, and I nearly lost the most important thing I had. The fact that I was given the opportunity to correct that error is something I will not take for granted." 300 people in a room. She was at the back of it. She put her tablet down at her side. "There is one more thing," he said. She looked up. He was looking at the back of the room. At her. In front of 300 people who were now also looking at the back of the room. I have spent 4 years, he said, having the most important conversations of my professional life with a woman I kept at the edge of my attention. I am finished doing that. He moved around the table at the front of the room, stepping away from the podium, which was not in the program she'd organized. She was going to have words with him about deviating from the program. I am finished treating proximity as a substitute for honesty. He was walking toward her. The room was completely silent. She stood at the back of it with her tablet at her side and her reading glasses on, and her sister's voice somewhere in her recent memory saying, "Call me the second anything happens," and the window ledge in her office that now had a pothos on it, the same variety as the one she'd left behind because she liked plants that were hard to kill. He stopped in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the faint scar above his eyebrow from the butterfly closure, healed, slightly crooked, as she'd predicted. He was not a man who knelt easily. She knew that. She knew every posture he used for every occasion, the full catalog of how he held himself in different contexts, 4 years of involuntary observation that had never been requested. He knelt. 300 people watched him do it. She looked at him. "You told me once," he said, quietly enough that the front of the room probably couldn't hear, "that the strongest systems are built on trust." He paused. "You were right. You're always right, which is occasionally irritating." Another pause. "I want to build the next one with you, not behind me, with me." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about a list started at a kitchen table. Step 1. She'd never finished that list. She'd started working instead, which was what she did. She thought about the notepad with the small dent from the pen. A period. No bigger than a period. She thought about her sister's porridge, and the novel she'd finished, and the window ledge, and the new document she'd saved in a folder labeled Miscellaneous Archive. "Get up," she said. He looked at her. "Get up," she said again, and her voice had something in it that wasn't firm and wasn't soft. "Because I'm going to say yes, and I would prefer not to be looking down at you when I do it." He stood up. 300 people in the room did not make a sound. She looked at him, at the crooked scar and the controlled face, and the thing underneath the controlled face that she'd been reading for 4 years without letting herself name it, and she said, "Yes." The room broke. She didn't look at the room. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and his hand came up and covered hers where she was still holding the tablet, and she felt his fingers close around her hand, warm and solid and slightly rough at the knuckles from 3 months ago, and she thought, this is what it costs, not the bad parts. This, later, much later, when the room had wound down and the logistics of ending a gathering of 300 people were mostly resolved, and Junho had given her a look that contained about 9 years of professional restraint before saying simply, "Congratulations," and walking away. She stood at a window on the building's upper floor with Min-jae beside her and looked at the city doing its late-night things below. "You deviated from the program," she said. "I know." "I organized that program very carefully." "I know." "Next time," she said, "tell me in advance." He was quiet for a moment. "There's going to be a next time." "There's going to be a great many times," she said. "Events, logistics, seating charts. I am apparently incapable of leaving these things to chance." "I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." She looked at the city, the lights of it, the ongoing ordinary nighttime motion of a place that did not know or care what had happened in a gathering room on its upper floor. She'd spent 4 years making sure things didn't fall apart. It had been invisible work and hard work, and work she was genuinely good at, and she was going to keep doing it, differently, with different terms, with her name on the door and her own side of the desk and the authority that should have come with it from the start. But she was also going to do something else. She was going to notice when she was tired and say so. She was going to leave on time occasionally. She was going to take the lunch breaks. She was going to keep the pothos watered and the spare reading glasses in the top right drawer and the list on her laptop in the folder labeled Miscellaneous Archive, and she was going to add to it when she had something to say. She was going to be here, fully here, not behind anything. She'd earned that. Min-jae's hand found hers again, there at the window, and she didn't look at him, and he didn't look at her. They both looked at the city. And she thought about the first morning she'd walked into his building 4 years ago, with a canvas tote and a folder of references and reading glasses that kept slipping down her nose, and how she'd stood in the lobby and noticed 3 things that were wrong with the security rotation before she'd been in the building 10 minutes, and had wondered if she should say anything. She'd said something. She always said something. That was, she thought, how all of it had started. And this? The hand over hers, the city below, the crooked scar and the pothos and the nameplate on the door. This was how it continued. Not ended. Continued. She laced her fingers through his. The city kept going.